So this is the second part to the video that I was presenting to UniRock called Wonderland. Okay, so I was just getting into these different perspectival frames. So I was saying that the I and the we are interior, and the it and the its are exterior. But we're also recognizing the fact that they all are included in an integrative whole within our body. As a monological scientific observer, we tend to focus on the it exclusively at the detriment to the we and the I. That is not entirely true. Most people are still very able and capable of respecting intersubjective boundaries and subjective boundaries. But typically the primary focus for most individuals on a moment-to-moment experience is on the objective reality. Females tend to be a little bit more we-oriented. The shift here then is, in a certain sense, you can look at it agentically, from masculine to feminine in a certain sense, if this fifth to sixth movement is accurate. So we'll see a movement from a more masculine domain of it, monological primary focus, to its feminine, sort of more feminine kind of interobjective focusing. That is to say that the integrating of many different domains that had been previously and largely left afield. So how does this all fit together? Okay, so if this theory... Okay, I'll go into the rest of the story. So I had this vision, as it were, on the sailboat after the fact. I had quit my job fairly recently and I was living on my sailboat. And I had this sort of experience where a philosopher came to me and he kind of said something like, soon you're going to go through very traumatic experiences. You're going to have to fight for something sort of bigger than yourself, or something along these lines. I can't remember the exact context. So it got me a little bit agitated, and I started to think about, are these sorts of visions, these sorts of things happening? Is there any legitimacy to them and whatnot? I had a few more visions of similar quality in the next few nights. Then one day I was just walking around and I had a fair number of cars sort of following me. And it was getting to the point that particular day, where it was really, really freaking me out. I ended up staying in a hotel that night. And I heard like a gunshot outside my room. It really kind of freaked me out, and I wasn't able to sleep, and I had all these like wild, weird visions. I can't say it any other way, the whole night, about what was kind of coming, particularly for me, in the very near term. And it was so dramatic. The context of what was gonna happen was so incredibly painful that I couldn't sleep. So here's the paradox. I experienced, if this is true, if anything about what I'm saying is true, is that the very notion of what was going to come in my immediate future was so incredibly painful, it might have actually caused the very fact that I was going to go into this. So I didn't sleep that night, and I called up a friend, sort of spoke with him about it. He was living in Redding, California. He kind of calmed me down a little bit. Then I talked to another friend of a very different mindset. The previous one had kind of a Christian orientation. The other one, although, I still think he's probably a pretty decent guy. He's often talks with me and stuff, and I have no hard feelings about him. I do feel actually quite bad about how I'll get into the story here, how I kind of broke the relationship off here, but I spoke to him and I said, yeah, I'm going to go meet him in Seattle, him and his girlfriend. I won't maybe present their names because they might not want their names presented, but I'll call him Mr. X and call her Mrs. Y. They weren't married. Okay, so I, in essence, called them and said, I'm going to go visit you in Seattle. Again, I was pretty worried because if what I was about to go through was true, I was going to be in a lot of trouble. And I also it seemed like there was people with a black vehicle following me. I don't know, you know, it's a weird aspect of this, but, and I have been very outspoken about conspiracy theories. I was very early into it. I was on YouTube. This could be possibly part of it. I was on YouTube talking about alternative governance models and so forth since about 2009. Not that I had very much of a following, never really, probably any more than about 500 people have ever watched one of my videos at most. But, you know, I've been talking about it for ages, so I've been there, you know, as a side voice, not very affecting of a personality, but there. Anyway, so I actually flew down to Seattle that night. Oh, no, sorry, that's not true. I went down to Vancouver and stayed in a hostel that night. And again, I had a similar experience with what happened to me on the boat. Now, again, keep in mind from this point forward, I am quite sleep deprived, and ever more as I go. So you can't take this too much as even, but it is a story that is interesting, I think. Once we get to the end of it, you'll still, I think, find this very interesting. So in the hostel, I was lying in the bed, and there was actually another person in the room, and they didn't feel anything. So very good chance that this is just my biological system kind of breaking down, maybe. Felt like somebody was, again, coming through the roof, their hand coming through and crushing my heart. Now, I was starting at this point to develop a new technique, and, you know, from the previous time on the boat, when I just about died, I never pushed back, really. And what I was starting to do is I was starting to go feel the energy that was coming through me and bring it back to the source and actually feel the heart, if that's what you can call it, of the other person doing it. And so if there's anything too magic, or what you might call that, whatever you might call it, that's what it seemed to be like. So it was like two hearts, in some sense, energetic hearts, one, you know, fighting the other heart. Needless to say, I couldn't sleep. I had no sleep that night, but I made it through, painfully. That kind of struggle went through all night, and then I went and I called another friend, and chatted with her. I'll call her Mrs. Z, and she was in a different location from the other two. And she kind of told me this whole elaborate theory about what she thought was going on. And it had to do with this idea. Actually, somebody in the chat mentioned something similar today on Unirock. And she was saying roughly that, you know, the idea might be that we're all going through this process where, you know, in essence, if we don't do it right, we repeat it. But we all play different roles in the process as it goes around. And so each time you get to play a different role as the process cycles. So this is the idea of roles. And I think this plays an important part of perspective taking in this context. So I mentioned all those different perspectives. And the idea is that we do move through kind of in an advancement sense through the different perspectival lenses as we march through time, potentially. And the further out your perspective goes, the more, the harder it is to find people akin to you, because so few people share the kind of worldview or landscape or value system that you share, because your value system is so incredibly obscure, if that makes sense. So you get kind of oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes kind of outcast from society. You're rejected by society because of it. If what she was saying is right, and I'm not saying it is, but that's what she presented to me. Okay, so then I go down to Seattle, and the bus ride, or I flew down to Seattle, and I gotta apologize to my friend X, and that's not his name, but my friend X for, you know, I made him kind of stay up late, and I didn't have my cell phone working. I didn't have like good internet, and he had to drive all around. So I really feel from this perspective now pretty bad about how this all went down. And he ended up eventually brought me back to his place. I had this orgone necklace, and as soon as I was gonna go to bed, I felt this ping go right through my chest where that thing was, and I couldn't. I don't know if it was anything or what it was. I was hoping that it would kind of protect me. I don't know. The crazy crystal guy. Yeah, that's right. No, I don't know. I don't really believe that stuff very much. But anyways, I did though. I had that, and I pulled it off really quickly, and I called my friends over, and they kind of like were trying to help me. I don't know, trying to help me deal with this situation because I felt like I was gonna die. Eventually, they had to go to work the next day. So again, I apologize. I really screwed up there. Not only kind of couple days, but I feel bad about this whole situation. But I was in a rough shape, so that's not a defense, but it was the situation. Anyways, I had a near-death experience that night. I'm pretty sure. I can't say if I died very long. I'm pretty sure I died for a few seconds. And in it, I saw Christ. I saw Jesus. And I was like, holy smokes. It was just a luminous... I really couldn't see his full stature. He was massive. I was way at his feet. And this is symbolic, I think. I was at his feet, and he was luminous. And he said something, and I can't recall what it was now. But... perhaps it was, I can't remember, but it was something important. I just can't remember what it was. I woke up and I had tears in my eyes. I was super sad about this whole thing. And I kind of decided at that moment, my friend in Reading, I had spoken with him a few days ago and he was Christian. So I was going to go flee down to him and try to take refuge in that space for a while and kind of throw off the ties that I had built in this space. And this is the dichotomy that I'm playing with here. I think that there's truth in what I'm saying in this other sense, but I think there's a deeper sense that is kind of Christian in orientation that is higher in play. So this is the weird paradox that I'm going to present to you. I think both are certain ways kind of true. But sort of the Christian teaching of do unto others, at least as sort of a foundation, is the more primary one. So, in essence, I flee down to Reading on a bus. And as I go, I venture through like a few places. There's this Wonderland started coming up. Wonderland had this kind of refractory aspect of like my interior landscape getting mimicked or built onto the exterior world. It was like the exterior world was now showing itself as myself from my interior landscape. So I'll put that differently. And it only comes really strong later in my life. But this is how it worked. In essence, it was like, and this could be totally pathological, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying but it was like, in many respects, the mind map that I had built in my mind was exteriorized, and my interior was exteriorized, and the exterior was interiorized. Don't know how to put that differently, but that's what it started to become like, and that's my best descriptor for what I call Wonderland. And for better and for worse. This is, I think, again, could be pathological here, but so a lot of troubles throughout this excursion. I ended up in Portland, Oregon, and at this point I hadn't slept for over 3 days. I hadn't been able to go to the bathroom on the bus or something. I can't remember why. And I was heading as fast as I could to a hotel, and I actually peed while standing up at the front desk on a carpet. Just horrid. This is the state I was in. Just a terrible, terrible state. Got upstairs, and then I had some visions of what seemed to me to be something akin to martial law, and that if I didn't do certain things energetically, I don't know how to put it any differently, that was the way I experienced it. And if I didn't do certain things energetically, there would be martial law in the United States very soon. So that was 2012, in and around that time. So I kind of came to the conclusion that that's what I was doing. That was the purpose for which I was doing this, to kind of energetically strengthen the situation around the planet. I was not as an individual, but playing a role in that somehow that I didn't fully understand. So the next day, I can't explain the whole reasoning behind all this stuff. It was like I was in a trance, so sort of like a halfway, half mystical, half dying, kind of contradictory, ecstatic / zombie kind of state. It was both and. It was at the same time both. I don't know how to put it, but I eventually felt that I had to go to this particular train station. So I go to the train station, and there's a person. So as I walk by, I see people like cutting the roses, and again, it's like a metaphor for the death of the rose. It's dying, with the same notion that those roses will probably regrow the next year, but it has this kind of context of like, this is a season in which there's going to be sort of a death in a certain sense. And so I go in, and as I go around, I think about, okay, if I get some cigarettes, I might be able to focus a little bit here. I'm in a terrible state, so I know cigarettes can kind of help clear up your mind a little bit. So I go there, and I see this guy, and it looks like he's going to pull out a knife. And I think that this is my moment. I'm going to die. And all of a sudden I see this white hat kind of walk by. A guy with a white hat walks by, and he looks at the guy. And the guy kind of puts I swear, I don't know if it was a knife or not, but this was like kind of what puts the knife back in his holster. And but then I get the sense that I got to go sit by the guy to be able to deal with this fear or take the stab. And this kind of notion of taking the stab kind of has been coming in through the night too, that I have to take the stab sort of to deal with some of this energy somehow. So in essence, I go and I sit right next to this guy who looked like he was about to stab me. Don't know if he ever was. And I don't know if there's anything to the story, but this is what was going through my mind, and I really did believe it. So I go sit beside him, and I get into this like really weird meditation, altered state, kind of like transcendental experience, and I can sort of, I think I could like see the guy in the white hat from his perspective or something. I don't know. It was very weird. And the guy never did stab me, and I got up and walked away. Then I walk into the train station, and on the television, they're talking about Hurricane Hurricane Sandy, the one that hit New York. And all of a sudden, I realize I am in the eye of the storm. So when I say this, or this is what it felt like. This is what I really believed. I believed that I was in the eye of the storm. And so I down the road, and I'll probably forget this, so I'll say it now. I look on my friend's Facebook page, as the first thing I see on Facebook from my friend is this picture of the eye of the storm. She posts the eye of the storm, and then she links it to Hurricane Sandy. I mean, again, it's not an uncommon thing to think about when you're thinking about a massive hurricane, but this is, it was like a metaphor that interior being exteriorized, exterior being interiorized. This is just one of many, many of these things that I just can't articulate. It was like a constant flow of them. Okay, so I eventually got onto the bus, and I thought I saw another guy try to pull a gun on the bus. I don't know why anybody would do this, but I really believed it. And I asked the guy to pull over and let me off, and the bus driver reluctantly did. Here's the thing. He let me off right in Mount Shasta. Okay, so in Mount Shasta, I find a hotel, like the last hotel available that night, and I book in to it, and I kind of freak out. I feel again like that hand is coming into my body and giving me a heart attack, and I'm fighting, and I went on for hours, and I eventually got out of bed and kind of started to run. I don't know what I was thinking. Anyway, I ran, and what was happening is it was like I was starting to gain a flow for what the interior was when it was exteriorized, and the exterior interiorized. And so that's what it started to feel like. I was getting more of a capacity for which to, rotate that. But it was still incredibly scary and, painful and terrifying at the same time. And I really did kind of believe either that there was an actual person there, or that there was a psychic person there, or there was a time traveler there doing this. I had one of those three potentials, but it really felt like I was being hunted in an extremely grotesque and painful way. I ended up falling down by a river, and I had this embodiment experience where that whole fractal system that I talked about before, the 6-on-6 fractal, was interiorized into my body in a certain sense, where I felt like those 6 fractal patterns were ongoing self-reflexively as the exterior world was manifesting itself in this interplay or dichotomy. I'm just saying this is what I believed, whether or not it was crazy, because it could very well be absolutely nut house crazy. So just take that into account, and I know you have, because I've said it about 50 times, but it's very true. I woke up the next morning after maybe 30 minutes of sleep, and I look up and I see these golden beings in the sky with this white rotating cone, and there's these golden beings living inside of these like nooks, and I associated it with maybe angels or something like this. And I ended up thereafter again going through this experience where I eat so much to talk about. I might have to make a third part. I'm sorry, this is going to be super stupid long. But okay, so I'm going back into this mode where I'm feeling the interior exteriorized, and it's painful and grotesque, and again, part of it is that my body is physically nearly dead. I'm 6 days in now, probably 5.5 days in without any sleep. Really, any kind of notable amount of sleep anyways. And it was like I was living, at this point, there was another layer to it being inbuilt on top of it. And it was like the story or the myth of humans. Like, at one point, I go up and I hadn't ate for a couple, maybe a day and a half, and I see this old tree, and I'm thinking of again, I don't know, correlation doesn't equal causation. I know these things. I'm not logically stupid, but I'm thinking that this tree represents the tree of Adam and Eve, and I'm eating an apple. So, but it's not the same apple that Adam and Eve are eating. It's the apple at a different fractal level. So the apple of the biblical apple would be like a fractal order lower than the apple that I was eating there. That was the context that it seemed, and it was like a terrible thing. I don't know, in certain respects, but that then I ended up running to a mountainside where I felt like, oh, this is the end, I'm dead. And I had this kind of brief moment, though, that I look down and I see this house, and I kind of make this higher level connection to this pattern that I've been building, the spiral dynamics pattern, where this is the fifth super system. So this is where 6-5 comes into play. And this is where Wonderland is articulated in its most particular way. Wonderland, in this sense, is 6.5 in the fractal, if there's anything to this. It goes stupid deep. I know it's stupid. But, so if humans' primary focus was this 5 focus of empirical, logical gaze, then 6 would be the systems theory. But with the 6 kind of brain, and I'm not saying I have the 6 brain, I don't know what the 6 brain is, if it's a spiritual brain or what, it potentially allows you to see this interior getting exteriorized. And the 5th system would be objectifying that interobjective system. That's really complicated to express, but that's what it would be if there's anything to it, potentially. So that's when I looked down at this house, and it was like a representation of that realization. And I'm like, I'm not dead. All I have to do is run down there and get help. And so that's what I did. And then they called the police. The police got me. My friends picked me up from Mount Shasta and brought me down to their place as a refuge in Redding, California. And I stayed and I prayed and I worshiped with them and stuff. And it was a really great time. And I don't know, like, I feel bad about them too, because I really did kind of, try to take in that worldscape. I was in a vulnerable place too a bit, but I really do believe in this higher power, and this is where it starts to integrate back into that presentation. So after all that, my parents were down in Vegas, and they swung down and picked me up in Redding and brought me back to my hometown in Canada. And I was living out on a boat in Squamish, BC, but they brought me back and they were very worried about me. Like, if nothing else, I could have very well had post-traumatic stress disorder. I hadn't slept for 6.5 days in the end of it. When I got to Redding, I was able to sleep with some trouble, but I was able to sleep. So I'll do the third part here now, and we'll get into trying to bundle this all together.